with matters protocol, where the planned state visit by Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi took an unexpected twist after the head of state failed to arrive in Kenya as scheduled. And President William Ruto was expected to hold a meeting with him at State House, Nairobi, yesterday in the morning, but the event was rescheduled at the last minute to today morning, raising questions whether this was a mix-up on the dates or other diplomatic reasons. And our senior political affairs reporter, Jeff Kiroi, will give us a perspective on this as we discuss more with the panelists.
On Monday evening, the Executive Office of the President, through the Press Secretary at State House, released a media invite scheduled for Tuesday for a press conference by President William Ruto and visiting Iranian President Dr. Ibrahim Raisi. By 8:30 Tuesday morning, almost all the journalists whose names had been transmitted for clearance had converged at Gate D, only to be turned back an hour later. According to the State House spokesperson Hussein Mohammed, who was accompanied by the Press Secretary Emmanuel Talam, the meeting was rescheduled for a later date. The unexpected turn of events raising more questions than answers. According to a dispatch released hours later by the Ministry of Foreign and Diaspora Affairs, Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi will arrive in the country on Wednesday morning for a state visit and will be hosted by President William Ruto for bilateral talks at State House, Nairobi. According to the ministry, the visit was postponed to allow the two countries to finalize key memoranda of understanding. This being a state visit, ordinarily plans are made at least a month in advance. The unexpected twist of events surrounding the visit putting the Ministry of Foreign Affairs on the spotlight. The docket under Dr. Alfred Mutua is mandated to coordinate state and official visits and manage bilateral and multilateral relations. The confusion surrounding the state visit by the Iranian president, raising questions on whether this was a mix-up on the dates or other diplomatic reasons. And did the cabinet secretary follow up on the scheduled visit and advise the president's office that President Raisi will not be landing, or the meeting was initially scheduled for Wednesday but failed to inform the president's office? Iran has been accused of involvement in the Russia-Ukraine war, particularly in the supply of war equipment to Russia, which has made it a target of the Western sanctions. Iranian president's state visit to Kenya to bolster the cooperation between the two countries, seemingly putting Kenya at the center of the West versus East geopolitics, given its strategic influence in Africa. The rescheduled visit raising questions as to whether some external forces might have been responsible for the uncertain turn of events around the planned state visit by the Iranian president. Jeff Kirui, KTN News.
And this is where we're actually slicing and dicing that particular issue as well with our panelists, holding court with Professor Peter Kagwanja, who's the CEO of Africa Policy Institute. We have Dr. Hassan Kanenje, who is the director of the Horn International Institute of Strategic Studies. Also, we have with us Ahmed Hashi, who is a governance and policy analyst and executive director of Amnesty International. This is Irungu Houghton. So, Irungu, you want to also to comment on that particular cartoon before we continue?
So obviously the power of religion is, it seeps from that cartoon. I think Gado has really captured the difference between the two leaders, but also I guess in some ways they're also heads of states. In many ways there has been a big debate in this country whether we are still a secular state, and of course constitutionally we are, but I think the power of faith diplomacy, as the language goes, is always being questioned in terms of whether we're making policy decisions based on, our religious inclinations, or whether it stems from the constitutional national values. I think the other thing that should be mentioned today, there's a great article in one of the papers, I think it's the People, that Pope Francis has just appointed several new cardinals. Yes. And for the Catholics who are watching us, this is of course of interest. And there are 137 cardinals, 13% of them, 18, are African now. And Pope Francis, of course, has been hinting that he's going to be stepping down soon. So what's really interesting at this time is whether African Catholicism will actually have a determining voice on who becomes the next Pope. And of course, one of the criteria for becoming a Pope is that you have to be under the age, I think, of 80. And Cardinal Joy is just 1 year short. So I think just shout out to Cardinal Joy that potentially we could have a Kenyan Pope if that election happened, the election happened. Is it an election? I'm not sure it's election. Anyway, it involves white and black smoke.
White smoke, yes.
If it happens in the next year or so. So I think interesting times for the Catholic Church. Perhaps we can ask Gado to do another cartoon.
So interesting also in Tanzania is where we have one of the cardinals that has been appointed by the president. Here we have not heard of any cardinal that has been, his name hasn't been put forward for the Pope to consider the election so far.
Maybe that's an agenda for our Ministry of Foreign Affairs. If they are watching, Cardinal Joy is 1 year short of papal capacity.
Okay. All right, let us continue with the discussion on this particular issue so far, because I think we'll be speculating on what will be happening today. But what do we expect from this particular visit? Bilateral agreements, because I think this is where now the memorandum of understanding was to be drafted before the arrival of the president.
I think we need to consider what Iran means for Kenya in terms of the our understanding. First and foremost, I think from a security perspective, there should be some clarification as to whether or not, what position Iran takes on terrorism and all that kind of thing. Just as a passing, I know China comes and say we are not for terrorism. America says we are not for terrorism. China, India, and so Russia and so on. But that would not be the core issue. The core issue is trade, business, energy, and what we are going through now in Kenya, including Huay Hashi, is in the streets, is because of energy crisis that we're facing. So if you had solved this energy crisis, Hashi would be comfortably, here. He'd not be looking at his watch whether his colleagues have gone out now and he has been left out. So energy is a big issue, and because as was stated earlier, Iran is one of the major sources of oil and gas in the world. But more importantly, Iraq is under sanctions. And how you negotiate through those sanctions without violating, or rather without, inviting responses or hostile responses from the United States and its allies is another matter. So I would describe this kind of visit as walking the high wire, because it's really walking the high wire, and how we get through that is very, very important. Yeah, because we need Iraq. Iran consumes our tea. Yes. It's a major market for our tea. It is also a major source of humanitarian assistance to the Muslim communities across the region. It is also a place where people go to, for studies. They have scholarships that who and to you if you have an Iranian stamp of entry and you are going to the United States, the computer goes up and you have to explain why and how you ended up there. So again, the point here is that is Kenya able to chart its own independent path? Of course, as a country, asserting its own sovereignty. That's it. At this time when we are moving from a unipolar to a multipolar world order. And it has been said that Kenya is the only candidate in Africa, among others, that are slated for the Singapore of Africa. We cannot become a Singapore of Africa if we are not able to assert our own sovereignty globally. And therefore, the way we negotiate, for example, with Iran, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Israel, the middle powers, as they are called, is going to be very, very important. Also, China. I think it's one of the Kenyan political economists who said that it is foolhardy for a country to think that you can be in bad terms with your greatest creditor That's why America, the minister of the foreign, state secretary, had to visit Beijing because America owes China money. Kenya the same. We don't have as much debt as we have with Russia as we have with the East. But it is important for us to begin to have a foreign policy that is guided by our interests as opposed to our fears. It's our interests, not our fears. And our interests are very clear. If we stabilize our energy, if we stabilize the markets for our tea, we stabilize the markets for our coffee and avocado, we are good to go. Old relationships about which good side and which is bad side, for me, don't matter. What matters is what Kenyans need. And what Kenyans need now is economic stability and a good foundation to take off. If that foundation will come from the East or the West, for me, it doesn't matter. It's where it is going to come from. We need to make good of our youth. We need to improve on them. And how do we do without forging relationship with countries like Iran, which have oil, which have gas, which have deep markets, and which are tied culturally to some of our population?
Ahmed Hashim.
Well, there's such a thing in diplomacy from the classic diplomacy, and it's called noblesse de robe. Gardo's description is very apt. Noblesse de robe, they don't teach any Latin in schools today. In my day, they did. Noblesse de robe is a concept about the people who wear robes of authority and how the responsibility they have to their country, to their population, to their region, to the continent, on what direction the state can take. So the president, to be quite blunt, has put his stake with the West. He has firmly put Kenya in that relationship with the United States, Europe, and in the Middle East. His relationship is with Israel, because that's where he recently went. I couldn't agree with my learned friend on the right here more today, that our foreign policy, and that's how it was when I was there, was that we looked at the national interest of this republic, first and foremost. And one of the great proponents of that policy is sitting here on my left, even though sometimes I don't agree with him about this issue of national interest. But on this specific issue, my learned friend on the right is absolutely right. I think what the president has done is that he's put his economic and diplomatic and stake with the West, and I think that's a very, very wrong thing to do. Because, Debal, when that fails, or if something goes wrong with that relationship, it's going to be a long day's road to come back and look for relationships with middle-income countries, with those who are creating a multipolar, fighting for a multipolar system in the world and in our region. For an example, Debal, I've always believed that our region, our East African region, should have the same financial policy, should have the same diplomatic policy, should have the same trade policy. We should have all those things together, because Debal, it gives us, for want of a better word, the oomph, or it gives us the substance to collectively confront the issues of international relations today. And I've argued repeatedly that international relations today is spinning on the axis of globalization at such a rate, Debal, that we just don't know what's going to happen next. I'll give you a simple example about values, Debal. The United States obviously put pressure in Europe on President Ruto for this man, President of Iran, not to come here. You know why? Because they're selling arms to Ukraine, to Russia, specifically drones. And Debal, the United States is fighting with its nails in Ukraine. Iran is one of the strongest partners for Russia in this Silk Road diplomacy, if I can call it. China, the Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Russia, India, and Brazil, and South Africa are providing an alternative pole in international relations to the unilateralism of the United States. Debal, the idea that President Biden has argued in the State Department, and my friends here will bear this out, that the United States foreign policy is based on the values of human rights, the values of liberty, freedom, and democracy. It is selling cluster bombs to Ukraine, Debal. Sending cluster bombs to Ukraine. Cluster bombs, Debal. They are banned by the international community. Yesterday, the United States was sending cluster bombs to the United States. Now, where is that moral value that the president or the European Union or the United States can call our president and say, the president of Iran cannot come to this country, while they're selling cluster bombs to Ukraine? Debal, it is very important for us to be transparent about what our national interest is. And I think that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, embodied by the Minister of Foreign Affairs, can make his foreign minister, the foreign ministry, what it is. It's the foreign minister who makes it. Debal, we've had C.W. Arguings Kodek was a great foreign minister. Monyo Wayaki, who used to confront Charles Njonjo in cabinet. Madam Amina Mohammed, our last one, a wonderful and our permanent secretary. Wonderful women who did a great job at that ministry. I was there as well, Debal, I'm sure I contributed. So I think that this is a matter of urgency, that the independence of the Minister of Foreign Affairs has to be asserted. And I think in that way, we can get an intellectual policy, a breath on what we need to do. And if the deputy president and the president are there, pushing these agendas on their own, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs is lackluster and helpless, it's not going to work. And I think that Mr. Mutua is not a good fit for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I think we should get an adroit Minister of Foreign Affairs who knows a thing or two about this thing. And I think that's where the problem is. I think the leadership in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has blundered now 3, 4, 5 times. Maybe change is needed there.
Right, but I'm a bit antsy when you drag in other countries without any confirmable facts, actually. So
Ask me.
It's your opinion. And I wouldn't really admit that we are flying with the idea that, yes, you're saying this particular country is associated with this particular development that we have with this particular president. So that remains your own opinion.
No, the United States has been doing that across the world.
That remains your own opinion, as I said. Let's hear from Dr. Kanenje, and we'll wind up on it.
Yeah, one of the things that I think African countries have not been doing very well, and I think increasingly in the last few years, some countries are rediscovering themselves and they're discovering they need to look out for themselves, is about advancing national interest. Now, I think Prof mentioned with regard to some of the discussions related to terrorism and stuff like that. And I think what we've come to believe, because a lot of times when we hear about the Islamic Republic of Iran, we hear about Iran having been categorized as a state sponsor of terror.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, it is true that Iran has certain friendships or alliances with groups in the Middle East, like that some countries don't like, for instance, and those links go back decades. It's not just today. But I think it's important for those of us who work in this space of terrorism. 98% of all terror in the world is not conducted by Shia groups, it's conducted by Sunni groups. And for those who are not Muslims, Iran is predominantly a Shia group, it's the largest Shia group in the world. And we have many Shias also in this country, including the Aga Khan, who we actually like very much. And so sometimes we should not conflate the two. That doesn't mean, but that perhaps some people are not comfortable with perhaps some of the engagements that Islamic Republic, is involved in. And so this thing of terror, if we have to use these groups, and Prof knows this: Al-Shabaab, ISIS, Al-Nusra, the Al-Qaeda, name it, all of them, virtually, they're Sunni groups. Now, having said that, it is important for us to recognize that as a country, and I do agree with my colleagues, we need to be able to pursue a national interest. That does not mean that we have to yank our old friends. We simply need also to be firm with them that even us and our interests do matter. Because a lot of times our interests have been subservient to foreign interests, whether the east, west, center, south, north, and stuff like that. And that is something that we need to actually come very clear about. Now, for us to do that, we also need a team. around our president and any president in Kenya
Correct.
that is competent enough, that is reasoned and reasoned
Correct.
enough to avoid some of the mistakes we have been making that have been costing us both regionally as well as internationally. And this is something that we have to talk about. You can't substitute experience for anything. You cannot substitute gravitas that people may have and bring to the table for loyalty. You cannot do that. And so if we move in the direction of actually also using the kind of persons, and there are many in this country and there are many in government who have the knowledge, understanding, a desire, but they also deeply care about this country, we are going to make fewer mistakes. But I do support the idea that Kenya can move with courage to engage the world in its own terms.
Correct.
And not in ways in which it's going to be defined by our friends, our allies, or our enemies. But we should also be careful not to start choosing and picking sides. And the reason is even those who may want us to pick sides, they actually want us to pick their side.
See?
Yeah, no one will ever want you to pick the other side.
Yes, side.
But then,
Of course, it's the national interest
Exactly.
that Peter Kakwanja has been talking about.
and one of the things I always do in my trainings is Kenya should always pick each side, meaning we have to choose ourselves. And by choosing ourselves, while we have to be careful, there is always fear of retribution, fear of punishment. This is how we deal with fear. Build sufficient alliances, and as one of the most important countries in Africa and the global south, we can always raise our voice to make sure that whatever you're thinking in terms of retribution is not going to get us, because we're going to have so many people around us in the kind of decision we're going to take, so that we do not walk alone, whether within the region, or regional issues, or within international issues. I think that is going to be a solution and a formula for success diplomatically, both economically as well as internationally.
I mean, there's not much to add after Hassan has done a great job. But I think a couple of things. One is, I think I would agree with everything that's been said. We need to have an independent policy. We need to have national interests. We need to work with like-minded nations. All of this, I think, is very important in terms of foreign policy focus. But I think the other thing that I worry a little bit about is I don't hear a global vision in some of the relationships we're developing, because, which I think is very important. This year is the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This is one of the most strongest signals that was sent at the end of the Second World War in terms of creating a world in which everybody had the freedom of expression, everybody had the freedom of association, and the various articles within the UDHR. What I don't hear in the conversation a little bit is an examination of Iran's own human rights record, its own governance record. And I take the point on terrorism, but I think we have to recognize this is a state that very actively struck down tens of thousands of protesters just last year, and actually have more than 15,000 people in jails simply for expressing themselves in terms of the cost of living. So maybe, Hashi, if you were Iranian, you would probably be in a cell, not on KTN studio at this point.
That would be the same. Can I just say that?
Let him finish. Let him finish.
So one of the things, there's been a really important academic concept of extractive economies, right? And some of us who, were inspired by the Dar es Salaam school of thought talked about what is an extractive economy? An economy that essentially strips its own raw materials for the interests of other economies, slavery, mineral extraction, and so on. But you also have extractive democracies, democracies that are essentially imploded by a centralist or authoritarian state. So they pillage the National Assembly, they pillage the judiciary, they don't allow independent institutions to breathe, they don't allow citizens to breathe. That's an extractive democracy. And I think the third element, and actually I picked this from one of the articles this morning by John Ouma. It's a great article in the Standard. And he generates this concept of extractive democracy. I'd like to take it a step further and probably argue that we need to go beyond an extractive diplomacy approach, which is the idea of it is only geopolitical concerns or I guess what you'd call kind of financial needs that should drive our foreign policy. I think we have to be bigger than that. I'm not saying we should not follow national interests, but I am saying that we have to choose our friends carefully based on national values, not simply on the national interest alone.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, Peter Kagwanja, also on that particular note, when choosing your friends and having perceptions as well, we know when we hark back to the history of Iran as well, the sentiments that were put forward by the former president, Mohammed Ahmadinejad, we should have Israel wiped off the map. That was his sentiment that really sparked a lot of controversy as well. If we go back and you're talking about perception, and we have him here in the country, and we've alluded to that Israel also is a good ally of Kenya, as it were. How is this meeting bound to affect also the perception of Israel towards Kenya, having the president here?
That's a good question, I would say. But to put it in context, that Iran itself has been going through changes, even within its own system. The Iran of Ahmadinejad is not the Iran of Raisi. Definitely, that's very clear. And what Iran is now doing is what many other countries are doing in the world, basically promoting your own diplomacy in other countries. So and Africa has been identified as one of the key players globally in the coming century. That you no longer can ignore Africa as a player in the global politics. So Iran is pivoting towards Africa, and it's pivoting towards Africa. Particularly the three countries that it has targeted are countries that, apart from Kenya, the other two are supposed to be pariahs to the west, Zimbabwe and Uganda, because of their different positions. So Kenya seems to be having some neutral position, given the statements that we have been making in the past and so on. We're somehow aligned but non-aligned in a certain way, if that makes sense. Therefore, in this tour by Raisi, the big issue is that he's trying to break the isolation or reduce the isolation of Iran globally, to test the waters by forging new alliances, or to see whether they can form new alliances. So what we have seen here as hiccups in his coming is part of the challenges of forging these new alliances. Remember, this is the first trip in almost 11 years, over a decade, that an Iranian leader has come to Africa. So it's significant to look at it that way. But when we come to us, talking about our question and what Houghton was talking about, that foreign policy is not just about economics. It is also about values. But what values are we talking about? And how are these values to guide us? For me, I just listened to Lee Kuan Yew, in terms of how he articulates the values that should guide your foreign policy, and also which should govern your internal development processes, which is simply to say there are three of them. And Kenya is, I would say, honestly, we are messing up on all this. The first one is merit, a system of meritocracy. Let's call a spade a spade. In foreign policy, in many others, yes, not a big spoon. In many of these areas, the president is competent. We have no doubt about that. He's extremely competent. But does he have men who are competent enough? So it brings me to Kwame Nkrumah, who was asked, who claimed to be a revolutionary, but all these rakis, capitalist rakis around him, who are sleeping on golden beds. So he's socialist, but all his cabinet is capitalist. And that messed up Nkrumah, a great man, a great leader on the continent, but who was messed up by his very bad choice of people to work with. Merit matters. A system that survives on the basis of meritocracy. Meritocracy. Look at countries like China, look at countries like Singapore, look at countries like Indonesia, which are rising. Why are they rising? Because to be in the top 7 in China, the top 7, the cream, you have to have governed over 110 million people for 10 years and given a stamp of approval. So here, anybody who comes from anywhere can be anything. You can be a cabinet minister even if you came from nursery school. I mean, this is what is that. What matters is the merit. It's not the merit. It is that you belong.
connected.
And you're connected. And you don't have sometimes to be connected to the top. You are connected to the networks that are doing this. We need to return to meritocracy if you want this country to soar up. Second is the question of pragmatism. I looked at that cartoon and what it is saying. We are Muslims, we are Christians, we are African traditionalists, we are Hindus, we are everything in this world. And that is what we are as Kenyans. Full stop. Pragmatism, respect for others, listening to every shade of opinion is what makes us. The moment you move from that meritocracy, pragmatism, then you have a problem. In the spirit of pragmatism, we should not have a problem dealing with Iran.
Yes.
Why should we? Because it's our pragmatism that will guide us. And our pragmatism is we have a Muslim population here. Iran has resources. Iran is a market. So our choices are very clear. It's not about what Americans tell us or what the British tell us, what others tell us. It is what we tell ourselves in terms of our choices. Finally, the third value that Lee Kuan Yew talked about is honesty, which is basically captured by the chapter 6 of integrity, leadership with integrity, and we as a people of integrity. Let's be honest, and everybody will see that we are honest, and therefore we'll reduce a lot of problems to ourselves. Honesty here means we invite Iran, or invite Iran ask to come to us, and we agree that they are our guests. Then we be honest about what we are doing. Let's not be worried about what we are doing. We have a guest. The guest is well known. Let us handle them as guests. That's what honesty would mean in terms of foreign policy. So if we anchor our foreign policy on meritocracy, on pragmatism and honesty, then we should not be having the brips and the gaffes that we are having today.
You still haven't answered my question before we come to Hashi
Yes.
regarding the Israel optics on this particular visit and the recent, all the previous pronouncements from Iran regarding the extermination of Israel.
But that's what I'm saying, that for us...
You've not really said expressly about
No, let me say this. I mean, anybody who wishes the extermination of another, that's not right. Nobody would say that is right. I don't think that the Iranians themselves are very happy with that statement, however it was made. Let's also understand that countries' views, like one time in the 1980s, 1990s, there was an old man here called Ahmed Nasir.
Yes.
Sharif Nasir.
Yes,
Sharif Nasir from Vita. Yes.
Vita.
The man from Vita said, "Do you like it? Take it or leave it." Or
Upende usipende.
Upende usipende. That statement was made. That statement was made, but was that a Kenyan position about anything? No, it was not. So I don't think it was an Iran's official. But also remember that
Just let him finish.
Within the Middle East, in the past, things are changing now. But in the past, Israel was seen as the enemy of the Arab, and many Arab states, from Turkey to Saudi Arabia to others, had made all manner of statements. The wars that have been fought in the Middle East is about the survival of Israel. Now, what we are celebrating now is the triumph of diplomacy, in the sense that Iran and Saudi Arabia can sit around the table and talk about their issues. That's a huge point. So this changing. I wouldn't want to say I will not have a sitting with the president of Iran in Nairobi because a statement was made in the 80s.
Yeah.
That's retrogressive.
Well, there's an old French poet. It's called De La Fontaine, who said that people meet their destiny on the road that they took to avoid it. People often meet their destiny on the road that they've taken to avoid it. And I think that it's very important for us to, deal with a few facts, Debal. And one of the few facts that we need to deal with is that Iran is a founding global civilization. It's an old Persian civilization. It is a cultural economic, political hegemon in history. And today, Iran sits on the axis of probably the most important region in the world, which is the Middle East. It is one of the major producers of oil, as our learned friend has said. And it is true that my colleague there says that the record of Iran and on issues of human rights is not that good. It's true. It's a lot of lack of dissent. A lot of people are being put in jail. There's a lot of problems. There's a movement by women there that was clamped down. But Tebal, if you look at what is happening in Jenin today, if you look at what's happening in Jenin, and if you look what the Israelis did in Gaza, I mean, Palestine is now a human rights garbage dump compared to what's happening in Iran. I mean, the international community is up in arms about what is going on in Jenin today. And in the last show, you remember we spoke about these gross violations of human rights in that area. And I think that we in Africa should be able to have a policy of making sure that the Middle East is a place of peace and not a place of war. And we shouldn't take sides with the Iranians or with the Israelis. And I think that Africa is not a kid on the block. It is a gentleman around the corner. And it needs to participate in diplomacy as it's within its own right. The consensus you can see here is the same. We are arguing for a foreign policy based on values, based on our national interest, based on our region, and mostly important, Debal, based on our Afrocentrism, the values of our African political economy. And I think that, Debal, if you look at the news, that we have young men and women stuck in the border of Libya and Tunisia, where a racist regime in Tunisia is dealing with people so-called Black Africa in a way, Debal, that makes our international relations and our values of international relations become nondescript. So what I'm arguing about, Debal, is President Ruto in our Foreign Affairs Ministry should not kowtow to the West, shouldn't. It should not kowtow to the global capitals of this world. It should kowtow to the values and the interests and the political concerns that my colleagues and I have put on the table.
Right. I think we need to finalize on this particular visit as well. Dr. Kanenzi, you wanted to say something?
Yeah. Israel is a country that Kenya has very close relations with. We collaborate with Israel in a number of ways. It's not just in technology transfer. We have plenty to learn from the state of Israel. But on security matters and stuff like that, they have quite a bit of experience in dealing with security issues. But at the same time, it's still the last apartheid state, standing, in the world. We are not looking at that. I don't know whether we ask ourselves those questions. It played an instrumental role in how South Africa got a nuclear bomb. Literally, they're targeting other Africans. That was meant in 1971. Perhaps many Africans do not know that, and stuff like that. And many, many things, including the kind of things that are going on right now. If Africans and even Kenyans understood that Gaza, is the biggest prison, in the world, I don't know what they would say. If they understood that even citizens, Arab citizens in Israel are actually second-class citizens, and yet they were actually found there, I don't know what they would be saying. So the reason I'm saying is sometimes we have to distinguish these two things. So you have Israel that we're dealing with as a country, you understand? There are certain things we're able to get from it. And then you have the political aspects that are internal also to the state of Israel. If we had to go with all the statements made, then we will be holding the United States accountable for saying they want to nuke North Korea, because it's not good to nuke anybody, But why are we not holding them accountable just because Donald Trump said that? And so as a country, when it comes to foreign policy, and that is slightly, I may differ with my brother, Newton here, when it comes to foreign policy calculations, we should moralize only to the extent in which it advances our national interest.
Yes.
Right, thank you. And just the latest as well is that the Iranian President, Dr. Raisi, is here in the country, and he has been given 21 gun salutes at State House ahead of the meeting with his host, President William Ruto. That is the latest developments so far as this particular news is concerned. That Iranian President Dr. Ibrahim Raisi is in the country. He has already received his 21-gun salute at State House ahead of meeting with his host, President William Ruto. Right, we want to turn the crack right now and cross over borders. We go to Sudan, where Sudan's government refused to join a regional meeting aimed at ending nearly 3 months of brutal fighting, accusing Kenya, which shared the talks of favoring the rival paramilitary. A power struggle between Sudanese Army Chief Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and his former deputy Mohammed Hamdan Daglo, a commander of the paramilitary, I should say, Rapid Support Forces, spilled into war in mid-April and has since killed thousands of people and displaced millions. The East African Regional Bloc, IGAD, had invited the force to a meeting in Ethiopia's capital on Monday, while fighting still raged across Sudan. Neither Burhan nor Daglo personally attended the talks in Addis Ababa, although the RSF sent a representative to the quartet meeting led by Kenya, South Sudan, Djibouti and Ethiopia. IGAD said it will request the African Union to look into possibly or the possibility of deploying the East African Standby Force, usually tasked with election observers mission in Sudan for the protection of civilians and humanitarian access. Let's just listen into that meeting that transpired on Monday.
On 12th of June 2023, the IGAD Assembly of Heads of State and Government, having considered the situation in Sudan, established a high-level IGAD mechanism of 4, the quartet, to engage in an effort to resolve the situation in Sudan. I am delighted to convene this first meeting of the quartet today. In this regard, I welcome the members as well as the representatives of the two parties in Sudan. I also note and wish to thank all the partners that have joined us at this meeting. Pursuant to our decision in Djibouti, our Ministers of Foreign Affairs convened on the 19th of June this year. There has been a number of engagements aimed at securing a cessation of hostilities and commencing dialogue at various levels. During this period, I have also undertaken consultations with a number of neighboring countries, including Egypt, Eritrea, Chad, Central African Republic, as well as the African Union Chair, the President of Comoros, and of course, many hours of planning with my brother, Prime Minister Abiy. In all the instances, there has been a strong emphasis in support of the IGAD effort to end the conflict, address the worsening humanitarian crisis, and facilitate engagement in an inclusive political process that restores civilian governance to Sudan.
Well, the sentiments there of President William Ruto during that particular meeting, it was a no-show for some of his leaders. We just want to put that into perspective with the panelists so far. And maybe I will begin with you, Professor Peter Kagwanja, because the sentiment that has been put forward is that they didn't participate in this particular meeting because of Kenya particularly presiding over this IGAD meeting and Kenya having taken sides as far as supporting RSF is concerned.
Well, I think this issue was put on the table a long time ago by the military in Sudan, which essentially said that it's not going to participate if Kenya is the one that is chairing. But remember, the decision that Kenya should chair did not come from Kenya. So it came from IGAD. And I think IGAD did not alter its own position that was taken in Djibouti, that Kenya is the one to chair that particular process and that it's going to involve other 3 countries. Therefore, that's why we're talking about the quartet. And therefore it's all a question of whether the military in the Sudan is willing to have IGAD as a mediator, because what IGAD chooses is what it thinks is in its best interest, and possibly a country with capacity. And when you look at the countries that were chosen, I don't know what Sudan would be up to, because South Sudan itself is being mediated by IGAD. Its own crisis is in the hands of IGAD as we speak. Now, if you look at Ethiopia, Ethiopia is having its own crisis in Intrigues, and the case is being handled by the African Union and very closely the countries within IGAD. And the countries within IGAD here refer to Kenya, one of the countries that have been a key player in the mediation of Ethiopia. Now, the other country involved is Djibouti, of the quartet, I think. Now, and when you look at Djibouti itself, it's a small country within the region, and the chair and the host of IGAD. So therefore, for me, the most qualified country to deal with this matter is Kenya, because at least we have put our act together in all this. This is what one of the British scholars, Nick Chisman, was calling hegemonic instability in Africa. That the countries that are supposed to backstop, problems of, peace and security are themselves unstable. But Kenya seems to be an exception to that, particularly after the election. We have not reached the level of instability that you find in Nigeria, in Ethiopia, and so on. And therefore, the resistance by the military itself is indicating that Kenya is aligned to the rapid response force. But I don't think that is IGAD's position. Let me stop there for now.
Right, but we have to respect as well their sentiments if they feel at all that one country has taken sides as well.
No, Kenya did not choose itself to be the chair of IGAD. Let's get it clear. And therefore, rebellion by one of the actors does not mean that they are right. They are not, by rejecting it, but does not mean they are right. Two, I have argued that of all the core leaders in this quartet, the most competent is Kenya to handle the matter. And two, it is not Kenya that is dealing with this matter. This is an IGAD matter. And it is governed by IGAD rules. So when somebody says the one is aligned to this and this, let them come in and they point out at what kind of favoritism is coming in.
Right.
It's a very normal strategy for countries to reject the chair in negotiations because it gives the chair, after he's confirmed, a leeway over accusations. It's a very strategic way of negotiations. And I think that what Sudan is doing is pathetic, because I feel that what is happening in Khartoum and what's happening in Omdurman and Port Said, Debal, there are massive war crimes that have now occurred in that country. As I correctly predicted last time, there's about 1 million refugees that have poured into Chad. This is not the time for the president of Sudan to say the chair of IGAD is biased or not biased. What we need are direct talks. And I really want to criticize the head of the Rapid Response Force, Mr. Dr. Abbas, who said that we cannot go to Sudan unless Mr. Burhan tells us to. I mean, Debal, there is such a thing as international relations, but also there is such a thing as relations of the international. And, by that I mean, Debal, that the responsibility to protect Africans and civilians in dire need will not be put in a theoretical norms about who is going to invite us and who is not going to invite us. I think that there's a direct, immediate and profound danger to the very stability of our region. And that cannot be placed on the fulcrum of asking Mr. Burhan, who is the person who led a coup d'etat in Sudan, that whether or not the niceties of international relations are going to be extended to the rapid response team to go and save people in Khartoum. I find this to be, rather outrageous, Mr. Debal, if I can put it to you. Secondly, Debal, I feel that that we have already spoken in IGAD, we have already spoken. The time to speak is over, it's the time to act. And it is high time that states in our region begin to understand that if we do not act, I argued last time that international terrorism is going to go and sit and drink coffee on the streets of Khartoum. And Ethiopia, Kenya, South Sudan, which is already a fragile state, Uganda, are going to be in deep, deep trouble. Debal, this is not, if I can use a French word, to pussyfoot around this issue. I think it is very, very important for an immediate, thought-out military action to prevent these forces from destroying the first independent black state in Africa. It is, as President Museveni correctly put, it puts paid to the idea of independence in our countries. I think the human rights of the people of Sudan, the right for their protection, supersede nice cafe norms about international relations. We need to act, and we need to act now on the Sudan.
Right. I want to just jump in also and just say, I completely agree with Hash in terms of sense of urgency. I mean, we've seen it's just over 600 deaths, according to the figures, and up to 3 million people are in flight at the moment, either, fleeing the conflict in the country or to the neighboring areas. So it is really, I think it is really critical, and there is an imperative to actually decisively bring this to an end. And I just note that the 600 people are just slightly less by 100 the number of people that we've seen lost in Shakahola. So just to remind ourselves, if I could just make two connections. One is in terms of the horror of Sudan, but also the horror of Shakahola as the Senate committee continues to take testimony. And I think in the newspapers today we have the testimony of the Cabinet Secretary for Interior.
All right.
Yes.
I think we should just take a short break. Then when we circle back, we shall hear from Dr. Hassan Kanenje. As you can see also on screen, this is a communique there on the first meeting of the IGAD Quartet group of countries for the resolution of situation in the Republic of Sudan. And that was on Monday the 10th. The meeting was chaired by His Excellency William Ruto. You had him speaking there. Also in attendance, we had His Excellency Abiy Ahmed Ali, Prime Minister of Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia. Honorable Mohammed Ali Yusuf, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Djibouti, representing His Excellency the President of Republic of Djibouti and Chairperson of IGAD, and Honorable Benjamin Bolmel, Special Envoy of the Republic of South Sudan, representing His Excellency the President of the Republic of South Sudan and Deputy Chairperson of IGAD. Maybe also what we need to tease out was in this quartet we have South Sudan, and still they have issues as well at home. And when we hear the professor talking about Kenya being the most qualified to actually be chairing this particular quartet, the question will be then how do you constitute a quartet? A country that also has a warring faction ongoing, coming to